I never imagined a glass of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon would change my life forever. My name is Sophia, and 1 year ago I was living what seemed like a perfect life in a penthouse apartment in Boston, running my own successful event planning company, married to a man everyone called the brilliant investor. Funny how quickly your whole world can shatter, just like the crystal wine glass that left red stains on my white anniversary dress that night. Looking back now, I can trace the exact moment my life started to unravel. It was a crisp autumn evening. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In October, the kind of night where the city lights twinkled like stars against the darkening sky, Nick and I were celebrating our 5th wedding anniversary at Belvino, the upscale Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date 7 years ago. The same place where he'd proposed on our 2nd anniversary, presenting the ring between the appetizer and main course. That night was supposed to be a celebration. Earlier that day, I'd received the news that my grandmother Vivian's trust fund had finally been released to me on my 30th birthday. Gran had always been meticulous about her finances, establishing the trust when I was just a child with strict conditions that it would only transfer to me once I turned 30, regardless of my marital status. Financial independence is freedom, she'd always told me. Never let anyone take that from you. The trust was substantial, the culmination of my grandmother's shrewd investments over 6 decades. Gran had been a pioneer in her field, one of the first female financial advisors in Boston in the 1960s, breaking glass ceilings and building wealth that would eventually secure her family's future. While other grandmothers were baking cookies, Gran was teaching me how to read financial statements and understand market trends. Nick had seemed supportive when I first told him about the trust fund's release, kissing my forehead and ordering champagne to celebrate. But sitting there in Belvino, watching him swirl his wine with calculated precision, I noticed something different in his eyes. Something cold and calculating that I'd never seen before. Or maybe had chosen not to see. "We need to discuss what this means for our future," he said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he usually reserved for his investment team. "This trust fund could set us up for life, especially if we incorporate it into my new hedge fund. I've already been looking at some opportunities." I took a sip of wine, trying to ignore the way my stomach tightened at his words. "I was thinking of using part of it to expand my business," I said carefully. "Maybe open a second office in New York. Gran always believed in my work." "Even your little party planning business," Nick cut me off with a laugh that felt like ice water down my spine. "Come on, Soph. This is serious money we're talking about. We need to think bigger. I've been talking to investors about launching my own fund, with your trust as anchor capital." "My trust fund," I repeated, the words feeling strange on my tongue. "Nick, this is Gran's legacy to me. She specifically left it in my name." "We're married, Sophia," he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet that always preceded a storm. "What's yours is mine. That's how marriage works, or have you forgotten your vows?" I looked at my husband then, really looked at him. His perfectly tailored suit, his expertly coiffed hair, the way he held his wine glass like he was appraising a new acquisition. When had he become this stranger? Or had he always been this person, and I'd just been too blinded by his charm to notice? "I haven't forgotten anything," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "But this is my grandmother's gift to me, and I want to honor her wishes. She believed in my business, Nick. She saw value in what I do even if you don't." That's when it happened. One moment Nick was sitting there, his face a mask of controlled anger, and the next his hand was moving with deliberate precision. The glass of deep red wine flew across the table, its contents hitting my face and chest with shocking force. The cold liquid soaked through my ivory anniversary dress, the one I'd spent weeks choosing, instantly staining the delicate fabric a violent crimson. The restaurant fell silent, I could feel the burn of humiliation as other diners turned to stare. A server rushed over with napkins, her face a mask of horror. But all I could focus on was Nick calmly wiping his hands as if he'd just finished a satisfying meal. "Now look what you made me do," he said quietly, his voice carrying easily in the stunned silence. "If you'd just been reasonable about this." In that moment, as I sat there dripping with wine and shame, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't just about the trust fund or the wine. This was about power, control, and a truth I'd been avoiding for far too long. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head, something she'd told me years ago when I was hesitating to start my own business. The moment someone tries to dim your light, that's the moment you need to shine brightest. I stood up slowly, wine still dripping from my chin, and looked down at this man I thought I knew. "We're done," I said, my voice clear and steady despite the chaos in my chest. The words felt like freedom, like finally opening the windows in a room that had been sealed for too long. As I walked out of Belvino that night, leaving Nick calling after me about being dramatic, I had no idea what would come next. I just knew that something had ended, and something else, something stronger, was beginning to take its place. The cool October air hit my wine-soaked dress, sending a chill through my body that had nothing to do with the temperature. Taxi drivers slowed as they passed, unsure if they should stop for the woman in a stained white dress standing outside an upscale restaurant. In the reflection of a store window, I caught a glimpse of myself. Makeup running, hair disheveled, dress ruined, and instead of shame, I felt a strange sense of clarity. For the first time in years, the image on the outside matched how I'd been feeling on the inside. Damaged, stained, compromised, but not broken. Never broken. Before that night at Belvino, I thought I had mastered the art of balancing it all. My company, Radiant Events, had just landed a contract to plan the governor's charity gala. Our Instagram following had hit 150,000, and Boston Lifestyle magazine had featured one of my celebrity weddings in their summer issue. From the outside, everything looked picture perfect, just like the meticulously crafted events I designed for my clients. Nick and I lived in a glass-walled penthouse on the 32nd floor of the Beacon Tower with panoramic views of the Charles River that made every sunset feel like a private show. Every morning I'd wake up early to review client proposals while sipping artisanal coffee, careful not to disturb Nick's sleep after his late nights analyzing market trends. I'd trained myself to move silently during these hours, conscious that a sharp investor needs a clear mind, as he'd remind me if I accidentally woke him, his voice carrying that edge that always made me feel slightly guilty. Our routine was as precisely choreographed as one of my event timelines. Nick would leave for his firm by 7:30, and I'd head to my studio office in the renovated textile factory in South End, a space that perfectly balanced historic charm with modern functionality. My team of 7, mostly women, which Nick sometimes commented on with raised eyebrows, would already be there, working on design boards or coordinating with vendors for upcoming events. "You're so lucky," my assistant Celia would often say, her eyes wide with admiration. "Nick is so supportive of your career. Most finance guys I know expect their wives to just plan charity luncheons and decorate their homes." I'd smile and nod, ignoring the knot that formed in my stomach whenever someone praised Nick's support. They didn't see how he scrutinized every business expense, questioning whether I really needed that new event planning software, or if another industry conference was worth the investment. "Your business is doing well enough," he'd say, studying our joint account statements with the same intensity he reserved for stock charts. "But it's just parties, Sophia. It's not like you're managing billions in assets." He'd laugh then, making it sound like a joke, but the message was always clear. My work was decorative, frivolous, while his was important and consequential. Still, I'd convinced myself I was happy. We hosted dinner parties where Nick would charm our guests with stories from Wall Street, while I served carefully plated meals that I'd spent hours preparing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He liked everything just so. The temperature of the wine, the arrangement of the table settings, the topics of conversation. I'd learned to anticipate his preferences, to smooth any potential wrinkles before they could disrupt his perfect image of our life. My fashion choices became increasingly cautious. I found myself gravitating toward outfits I knew Nick would approve of, nothing too bold or attention-grabbing. "You're representing us both," he'd say when I'd wear something too colorful or trendy. The us in question being increasingly defined by his career, his ambitions, his image. We were the perfect power couple on paper. Nick, the rising star at Meridian Investments with his Harvard MBA and family connections. Me, the creative entrepreneur, whose events were becoming the talk of Boston's elite social circle. We were featured in Boston Magazine's 30 Under 30 issue 2 years ago, the photographer positioning us against the skyline, Nick's arm around my waist, his grip just a little too tight. The penthouse itself was a monument to our supposed success. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture that cost more than my first car, a kitchen with appliances I was afraid to use for fear of scratching their pristine surfaces. It never quite felt like home to me, more like a showroom designed to impress Nick's colleagues and clients when they came over for strategic dinners. I had my own space, at least, a small home office where I could work when not at my studio. Nick had insisted on glass walls to keep the open concept, which meant I was always on display, always observable. I decorated it with photos of my events, magazine features, and a small picture of Gran and me that Nick said would be better, in a less visible spot. "It doesn't match the aesthetic," he'd explained. We maintained separate bank accounts, my business account, which I managed, and our joint accounts, which Nick oversaw. "I'm the financial expert," he'd remind me whenever I questioned a transaction or investment. "Trust me." And I did, or thought I did, allowing him to manage our joint finances with minimal input from me. I was efficient at work. My clients praised my attention to detail, my ability to anticipate problems before they arose, my talent for making everyone feel special and seen. These same skills I brought home, becoming hypervigilant about Nick's moods, anticipating his needs, carefully navigating around topics that might irritate him. Our sex life had become another scheduled event, one where my role was increasingly to validate Nick's ego rather than express my own desires. "You're so lucky," he'd sometimes whisper afterward. "Most men wouldn't support a wife with a career." As if his basic respect for my work was some extraordinary gift rather than the foundation of an equal partnership. My grandmother Vivian was the only one who ever questioned this arrangement. During our monthly lunches at her Beacon Hill brownstone, she'd listen to my carefully edited updates about work and home, then ask questions that made me squirm. "Are you still pursuing that hospitality management degree you talked about?" She'd inquire. Or, "Whatever happened to your plans for expanding to New York?" When I'd explained that Nick thought it wasn't the right time, she'd narrow her eyes in that way that spoke volumes. "Remember, Butterfly," she'd say, using the nickname she'd given me when I was small, "a gilded cage is still a cage." I'd laugh off her concerns, telling her she was old-fashioned, that modern marriages were about compromise. But late at night, when Nick was working late and I was alone in our perfectly appointed penthouse, her words would echo in my mind. The last time I saw Gran alive, just 2 weeks before she passed, she'd taken my hands in hers and looked at me, with those piercing blue eyes that seemed to see straight through any pretense. "You're dimming your light, Sophia," she said. "I see it happening bit by bit. That spark you used to have when you talked about creating experiences that transform people's lives, it's flickering." I dismissed her concerns, telling her about the magazine feature, the growing Instagram following, the successful events. but she just shook her head. "Numbers and appearances," she said. "I'm talking about passion, about joy. When was the last time you created something just because it lit you up inside?" I didn't have an answer then. Instead, I changed the subject to her health, to her medications, to safer topics that didn't probe so close to a truth I wasn't ready to face. Now, looking back, I realized she knew exactly what she was doing when she structured her trust fund the way she did. Gran had always seen what I couldn't, or wouldn't, see for myself. Appearances. Our life was all about appearances. The perfect couple, the perfect home, the perfect balance of careers. But beneath the surface, cracks were forming. Hairline. Fractures in the foundation of what I thought was a solid partnership. I was working harder and harder to maintain the illusion, exhausting myself in the process, and somehow still feeling like I was failing. And all the while, Gran watched, waited, and prepared a lifeboat I didn't yet know I would need. My grandmother wasn't just any grandmother. Vivian Marshall broke into finance in 1962 when women were still expected to be secretaries, not investment advisors. She built her career brick by brick, facing discrimination and undermining at every turn, yet somehow emerging not just successful, but triumphant. "The men thought I'd be gone in a week," she told me once, her eyes twinkling with mischief. 50 years later, I was managing their pension funds. Our relationship had always been special. My parents, her daughter and son-in-law, were international humanitarian doctors, spending most of my childhood in crisis zones around the world. While they saved lives in faraway places, Gran raised me in her Beacon Hill brownstone, a 4-story testament to her success and independence. Unlike other grandmothers who baked cookies and knitted sweaters, Gran taught me about compound interest and market volatility. When I was 8, she helped me invest my birthday money in stocks. When I was 12, she showed me how to read a balance sheet. When I was 16 and wanted to start a small business planning my classmates' sweet 16 parties, she helped me create a business plan. "Money is not just currency, butterfly," she'd say, sitting in her library surrounded by first editions and financial tomes. "It's freedom, it's choice, it's the ability to walk away from anything or anyone that doesn't serve your highest good." At the time, I thought she was just teaching me about financial independence. Now I understand she was preparing me for exactly this moment in my life. Gran's library was my favorite place in the world. Dark mahogany shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with books on everything from economic theory to feminist poetry. The leather chair by the window was where she'd sit, reading glasses perched on her nose, the afternoon sun creating a halo around her silver hair. It was in this room that Gran shaped not just my financial education, but my understanding of what it meant to be a woman in a world that often tried to diminish us. "There are 2 kinds of power in this world," she told me when I was 19, and heartbroken over a college boyfriend. "The kind that's given to you by others, which they can take away, and the kind you build yourself. Always invest in the second kind." When I started Radiant Events at 24, Gran was my first investor. She didn't just write a check, she connected me with her network, introduced me to potential clients, and helped me negotiate my first office lease. While my parents sent encouraging emails from refugee camps, Gran was in the trenches with me, rolling up her sleeves to stuff gift bags the night before my first major corporate event when 2 assistants called in sick. "No work is beneath you if it's in service of your dream," she said, perfectly manicured hands working efficiently beside mine. When I met Nick at one of my events, a charity gala for a financial literacy nonprofit, Gran was cautiously optimistic. She appreciated his intelligence, his drive, his apparent support for my business. But even then, she saw things I didn't. After our 3rd date, I brought him to Sunday dinner at her house. He charmed her with his knowledge of wine and art, asked insightful questions about her career, and seemed genuinely interested in her stories about breaking barriers in finance. After he left, Gran was quiet, swirling the last of her bourbon in her crystal tumbler. "He's certainly accomplished," she said finally, "and quite charming." "But?" I prompted, sensing her reservation. "But he talks about your business as a cute little startup, as if it's a hobby rather than your passion." She set down her glass and looked at me directly. "Just watch for that. Butterfly. The way he talks about your work when you're not directing the conversation." I dismissed her concerns as overprotectiveness. "He's just teasing, Gran. He actually gives me great business advice." She nodded but said, "There's a difference between advice and direction, between support and control. Make sure you know which you're getting." As my relationship with Nick progressed, Gran's concerns became more specific. After our engagement party, where Nick had jokingly told guests how he was upgrading my business model, she pulled me aside. "Do you notice how he takes credit for your ideas?" she asked. "How he positions himself as the business mind behind your creativity?" "He's just proud of me," I defended. "And he does give me good advice." "Sophia, there's nothing wrong with taking advice from your partner. But there's a pattern forming where your successes become partially his, while your struggles remain entirely yours." I changed the subject, uncomfortable with her assessment. But Gran wasn't finished with her lessons. A month before our wedding, she invited me to her lawyer's office. There, she explained the trust fund she'd established for me, significant assets that would transfer to me when I turned 30, structured in a way that would remain separate from marital assets. "This isn't about Nick," she insisted, though we both knew it partially was. "This is about ensuring that no matter what happens in your life, you have options. Every woman should have a walk-away fund." Nick was furious when I told him about the trust structure. "It's like she doesn't trust me," he fumed. "Like she's planning for our marriage to fail." "It's not about you," I echoed Gran's words. "It's about financial independence being important to her. We're getting married, Sophia. There's no your money and my money anymore. That's an outdated, untrusting mindset." I almost gave in then. Almost called Gran to ask her to restructure the trust. Something stopped me. Perhaps the memory of her sitting in her library, telling me stories about women in her generation who'd been left with nothing after divorces, who had stayed in bad marriages because they had nowhere else to go. After we married, Nick's attitude toward Gran cooled considerably. He'd find excuses to miss our Sunday dinners, would check his phone constantly when forced to attend, would make subtle jabs about outdated feminist ideas when Gran talked about her career. For her part, Gran never criticized Nick directly to me again, perhaps sensing it would only drive a wedge between us. Instead, she focused on strengthening me, on reinforcing the lessons she'd been teaching all my life. When my business hit a rough patch in our second year of marriage, and Nick suggested I dial it back and perhaps work for an established event company instead, Gran took me to lunch. "Turbulence is part of any business journey," she said. "If you bail out at the first sign of choppy air, you'll never reach your destination." She then connected me with 3 new clients who helped turn things around. When Nick took credit at our dinner party for helping Sophia restructure her client acquisition strategy, Gran simply raised an eyebrow at me across the table. The message was clear. Notice this. During our 4th year of marriage, when I confided in Gran that I sometimes felt lost in Nick's shadow, she didn't offer sympathy. Instead, she gave me a book, a biography of Estée Lauder. "Read about how she built her empire while married," Gran said. "How she balanced being a supportive wife with being an ambitious entrepreneur. And notice how her husband supported her dreams rather than subsuming them into his." 3 months before she died, when Gran was already weakened by the cancer that would eventually take her, she invited me to her library one last time. Nick was on a business trip to London, and I'd been spending my evenings keeping her company. "I've been watching you dim your light, Sophia," she said, her voice frailer than I'd ever heard it, but her eyes as sharp as ever. "At first it was small things, deferring to Nick on financial decisions despite your own knowledge, downplaying your accomplishments around his colleagues, changing your appearance to suit his preferences. I started to protest, but she held up a hand. Now it's bigger things. Turning down the New York expansion opportunity. Scaling back your client list to plan more dinner parties for his firm. Considering freezing your eggs because he's not ready for children but might be in a few years when his career reaches a certain point. Tears sprang to my eyes, not because she was wrong, but because she was right. What happened to my fearless butterfly who was going to build an event planning empire? She asked gently. Who talked about revolutionizing how people experience important moments in their lives? Life is complicated, Gran, I whispered. Marriage is about compromise. Compromise is a two-way street, my darling. She reached for my hand, her grip still surprisingly strong. I'm not seeing much traffic coming from his direction. She died 2 weeks later, peaceful in her sleep. At the funeral, Nick stood beside me, appropriately somber, his hand on my lower back guiding me through the motions of grief. When her lawyer contacted us about the reading of the will, Nick rearranged his schedule, making sure to mention 3 times how difficult it was to move his important clients' meetings. Gran's final lesson was about to begin, though I didn't know it yet. The weeks after Gran's funeral were like walking through fog. I went through the motions, meeting clients, overseeing events, maintaining our home, but inside, a hollowness grew. Each night, I'd find myself standing in our penthouse looking out at the Boston skyline, wondering if Gran could see me somehow, wondering what she'd think of how I was handling her absence. Nick's patience with my grief lasted precisely 14 days. You need to snap out of it, he said over breakfast on the 15th day after we buried her. You have that pharmaceutical launch next week, and I've got investors coming for dinner on Thursday. I need you focused. I nodded automatically, pushing my untouched eggs around my plate. I had gotten used to these moments, the casual dismissal of my feelings, the prioritization of his needs. They happened so gradually that I hardly noticed anymore, like water slowly rising around my ankles, then my knees, then my waist. And Soph? He added, not looking up from his phone. Wear the blue dress for Thursday, the one that makes you look professional, but not like you're trying too hard. Davis is bringing his wife, and she's the jealous type. There it was again. Nick dictating not just the menu or the wine pairings, but how I should present myself. Blue dress. Professional, but not threatening. Accessories minimal. Hair straightened, not curly. The perfect corporate wife doll, arranged just so, I used to argue, to assert my own preferences. I thought I'd wear the red one, I might have said once. It's more my style. But I'd learned that such small rebellions weren't worth the tension that would follow. The subtle jabs throughout the evening, the cold shoulder in bed, the critical analysis of how I'd interacted with his colleagues the next morning. The water rises. You adapt. You learn to swim differently. Work became my refuge, the one place where I still felt like myself. At Radiant Events, I was Sophia Marshall, respected entrepreneur, not just Nick's wife. My team looked to me for direction. Vendors valued my opinion. Clients trusted my vision. The contrast between who I was at the office and who I became at home grew starker by the day, Celia noticed. You seem different when Nick calls, she observed after I finished a phone conversation with him about the dinner party. Your voice changes. Your posture changes. It's like you shrink. I laughed it off. Marriage means being flexible, I said, repeating one of Nick's favorite phrases. But her words stayed with me, adding to the growing unease I couldn't quite name. Then came the escalation. The red flags I can now recognize in hindsight, waving frantically in the breeze while I determinedly looked the other way. First, it was the monitoring of my schedule. I've synced our calendars, Nick announced one evening. This way I'll know where you are, and you'll know where I am. The loss of privacy felt uncomfortable, but he framed it as efficiency, as better partnership. The fact that he often changed my events without asking was just an oversight. Then it was the friends who gradually disappeared from my life. Ashley, my college roommate, was too negative. Sonia, my first employee, was obviously jealous of our success. Joey, my gay best friend, was deemed inappropriate after he'd challenged Nick on a political comment at our dinner party. "I'm just looking out for you," Nick would say. "For us, we need to surround ourselves with the right people if we're going to reach our goals." Our goals. Somewhere along the way, my dreams had been absorbed into his vision, like tributaries flowing into a river, losing their individual paths. The financial control tightened too. Nick suggested consolidating more of our accounts for tax purposes. He questioned business expenses more aggressively. When I received a substantial payment for planning a celebrity wedding, he had ideas about how it should be invested, in funds his firm managed naturally. "You're great at the creative stuff, Soph," he'd say, his tone both patronizing and final. "Let me handle the money. It's what I do." Even my body became contested territory. The comments about my weight were subtle at first. "Are you sure you want that pasta?" Then more direct. The suggestions about my hair, my clothes, my makeup increased. He scheduled personal training sessions for me as an anniversary gift, booked cosmetic consultations as treats. "I just want you to be the best version of yourself," he'd say when I objected. "Don't you want to look good standing next to me at firm events?" The isolation happened so gradually that I hardly noticed I was alone. Weekly dinners with friends became monthly, then quarterly. Calls with my parents grew shorter, less revealing. Even my professional network narrowed to those Nick approved of, mainly clients who could benefit his career or wives of his colleagues who posed no threat to his control. The worst part? I rationalized it all. Nick worked hard. He was under a lot of pressure. He had ambitions. He knew the business world better than I did. This was just what marriage looked like after the honeymoon phase. All couples went through adjustments. Gran would have seen through every excuse. In fact, she had seen it, had tried to warn me, but without her voice in my ear, I kept swimming in rising waters, adjusting my stroke, telling myself this was normal. 6 weeks after Gran's funeral, the reading of her will was scheduled at her lawyer's office in downtown Boston. Nick had initially suggested I go alone. "These things are just formalities, and I have that crucial meeting with Japanese investors," but changed his mind when I mentioned the trust fund would be discussed. Suddenly, his schedule cleared. "Family comes first," he said, as if this had always been his motto. "I should be there to support you." The drive to the lawyer's office was tense, filled with Nick's speculation about the trust amount and structure. "We could use it as seed. Money for my fund," he said, outlining his vision for our financial future. "With your inheritance as capital and my investment strategies, we could double it within 5 years." I made non-committal noises, staring out the window at the Boston streets. Something felt wrong about planning how to spend Gran's money before we'd even been through the formalities of her will, but I couldn't find the words to express this. Andrew Barrett, Gran's lawyer for over 40 years, met us in the elegant conference room of his firm's offices. He was older than Gran, well into his 80s, but sharp as a tack with kind eyes that assessed Nick carefully as we settled into the leather. "Chairs!" Vivian was very specific about her wishes, Andrew began, adjusting his reading glasses. I could feel Nick sitting straighter beside me, his hand finding mine in what might have looked like a supportive gesture to others, but felt like a claim being staked. What followed was a carefully orchestrated dismantling of Nick's expectations. Not only had Gran left me her Beacon Hill brownstone, but also her investment portfolio worth over $3 million, her art collection, and controlling interest in 2 small companies she had mentored and invested in over the years. Most significantly, she had structured it all in a trust that would remain legally separate from our marital assets. She was quite explicit, Andrew continued, pulling out another document. "The entire estate is to be held in a trust under Sophia's name alone, with provisions for continuing her work, supporting women entrepreneurs and financial literacy initiatives for young girls. I felt Nick's hand tighten on mine, but I kept my face neutral, a skill I'd perfected for client meetings. When vendors fell through or venues presented unexpected challenges, there must be some consideration for joint marital assets, Nick said, his smooth investor's voice slipping slightly, revealing the edge beneath. After all, Sophia and I have shared finances. Andrew's response was polite, but firm. The trust is quite clear, Mr. Reynolds. Mrs. Marshall was very specific about maintaining the separation of these assets. He turned to me. She also left this letter for you, Sophia. He held out a cream-colored envelope with my name written in Gran's elegant handwriting. The drive back to our penthouse was arctic. Nick gripped the steering wheel of his Tesla, knuckles white, while I sat with Gran's unopened letter in my lap. The gesture of waiting to read it, giving us both time to process, hadn't earned me any points. Nick's jaw remained clenched, his eyes fixed on the road with laser focus. We need to be smart about this, he finally said as we crossed the Charles River. That kind of money needs proper management. I know exactly how to structure the investments to maximize returns. Gran already had financial advisors, I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. Andrew says they've managed her portfolio for years. Nick's laugh was sharp, dismissive. Her advisors? Be realistic, Sophia. That's our money now. We can't let some old woman's sentimental attachments dictate our future. The casual cruelty of his words, some old woman, hit me like a physical blow. This was my grandmother he was talking about. The woman who raised me, who taught me everything from balance sheets to self-respect. I want to honor her wishes, I said, my voice quiet but firm. The trust is set up to maintain her legacy and support women entrepreneurs. It's what she wanted. What she wanted? Nick took his eyes off the road to stare at me. She's dead, Sophia. This is about what we want. What I want. Think about what this could mean for my fund. The way he said my fund made it clear he wasn't thinking about our future, but his ambitions. In that moment, I saw something I'd been avoiding for years, how every decision, every plan, every dream had somehow become about him. My event company was the business I let you play with. Our home was the penthouse I bought us. Never mind that my business success had contributed significantly to the down payment. Even my time was categorized according to his priorities. There were important events like firm fundraisers and dinners with his colleagues, and unnecessary commitments like my client meetings or industry conferences. I looked down at the letter in my lap, at my name in Gran's handwriting, and felt something shifting, like tectonic plates deep beneath the surface of my carefully constructed life. That night, after Nick had fallen asleep, I slipped out of bed and took Gran's letter to the living room. Moonlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating Boston's skyline, a view that had once thrilled me, but now felt like a beautiful prison. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal on the envelope and unfolded several pages covered in Gran's distinctive handwriting. My dearest butterfly, if you're reading this, it means I've finally found a way to help you spread your wings again. I've watched with growing concern as the vibrant, ambitious young woman I raised has slowly dimmed her light to accommodate someone else's shine. What followed were pages of memories, wisdom, and carefully laid plans. Gran hadn't just left me money and property, she'd left me a roadmap to independence. The trust was structured specifically to prevent any interference with my control of the assets. The brownstone was meant to be both home and headquarters for a foundation she'd envisioned, one that would support women entrepreneurs and provide financial education to girls from underserved communities. She'd even set up a separate account to fund the New York expansion of Radiant Events that I'd shelved at Nick's insistence. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for. It was as if she'd known exactly what roadblocks I would face and had systematically removed them all. "Remember, Butterfly," she wrote toward the end, "independence isn't selfish, it's essential. The right partner lifts you higher, the wrong one clips your wings to keep you grounded. I've given you the tools to fly. The choice to use them is yours." Tears streamed down my face as I read, but they weren't tears of grief. For the first time since Gran's death, I felt something like hope, a small flame flickering to life inside me. The next morning, emboldened by Gran's words, I made 2 calls. One to Andrew Barrett, alerting him to Nick's potential challenges, to the trust structure, and one to my bank, opening a separate business account, something Gran had specifically advised in her letter. Small acts of self-preservation that felt simultaneously terrifying and liberating. The rest of the week passed in a blur of passive-aggressive comments and thinly veiled demands from Nick. He accidentally scheduled a dinner with potential investors during my important client presentation. He questioned every business expense that came up on our joint credit card. He even showed up unannounced at my studio office, claiming he was in the neighborhood and wanted to see what keeps you so busy. Through it all, I maintained a facade of normalcy, but inside, something was shifting. Each controlling gesture, each dismissive comment, each attempt to override my autonomy added to a growing certainty. This wasn't love. It was ownership. And like one of my event designs, once I saw the fundamental flaw in the concept, I couldn't unsee it. "We should celebrate our anniversary early this year," Nick announced 5 days after the reading of the will. "I've made reservations at Belvino for this Friday." I should have recognized it for what it was. A calculated move to pressure me in a public setting where he thought I'd be more likely to acquiesce to his demands. But I didn't. I walked right into it, wearing the ivory dress I'd bought months ago specifically for our actual anniversary, about to learn exactly how far my husband would go to maintain control. Belvino hadn't changed since our first date. The same soft amber lighting, the same antique mirrors lining the walls, the same Italian opera playing softly in the background. Our regular table was in the corner by the window, where the city lights created a romantic backdrop that had once made my heart flutter. Now those same lights felt like spotlights in an interrogation room. Nick ordered for both of us, as he always did, carpaccio to start, followed by osso buco for him and branzino for me. "Remember our first date here?" he asked, reaching across the table to take my hand. His thumb traced circles on my palm in a gesture that used to feel loving, but now felt calculating. "You were so nervous you knocked over a water glass, and you were so embarrassed," I replied, remembering how charmed I'd been by his graceful handling of the situation. Now I wondered if that had been the beginning, his first demonstration of how he could manage my accidents, my mistakes, my life. The carpaccio arrived, paper-thin slices of beef arranged like autumn leaves on white porcelain. I watched Nick methodically add capers and olive oil, his surgical precision on display even in this simple act. He was building up to something. I could feel it in the air between us, heavy with unspoken demands. "I had an interesting meeting with the board today," he began, carefully placing a slice of carpaccio on crusty bread. "They're very interested in my fund concept. The timing would be perfect with your trust fund coming through." I set down my fork, the silver making a soft clink against the tablecloth. "Nick, we've been through this. The trust is set up for specific purposes. It's meant to honor Gran's legacy and support women entrepreneurs." "Purposes that can be amended," he countered, his voice taking on that reasonable tone he used to convince clients to invest in higher-risk opportunities. "Think about it, Sophia. My fund could double that money in 5 years. What's more important, making more money or following some sentimental plan?" The manipulation was so obvious it almost made me laugh, almost. Those sentimental plans include supporting causes Gran cared about deeply. They're part of her legacy, and I intend to honor them. Your grandmother, Nick said, his voice hardening, is dead. This isn't about her anymore. This is about our future, my future. And there it was, the truth slipping out. Not our future, his future. No, I said quietly but firmly. This is about my inheritance, my grandmother's wishes, and my choice. Nick set his wine glass down with surgical precision. Your choice? His laugh was cold enough to freeze the candle flame between us. When did you become so selfish, Sophia? So small-minded? This is exactly why women shouldn't handle significant financial decisions. You're too emotional, too attached to sentimental nonsense. Each word hit like a slap, but I held my ground. I'm not being emotional. I'm being responsible. Gran built. Something meaningful. Something that helps people. Helps people? He leaned forward, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet I'd learned to fear. Event planning and women's programs help people while I'm building financial security? You're planning parties and playing with charity ideas, and now you're going to use your grandmother's money to enable more of this useless frivolity? I thought. About the letters I'd received from clients over the years. The cancer survivor whose remission celebration gave her hope during dark times. The same-sex couple whose wedding I'd designed when other planners refused them. The teenage girls who'd attended my free workshop on event planning as a business. But I knew Nick wouldn't understand or care about any of that. My work has value, I said, my voice stronger than I expected. And so did Gran's vision. I won't let you destroy either. The change in his expression was subtle. A tightening around the eyes, a slight twitch in his jaw. If I hadn't spent years studying his faces, I might have missed it. But I knew that look. It was the same one he got when an analyst questioned his strategy or a client hesitated to invest. Let me make something clear, he said softly, dangerously. Let me make something very clear. His hand moved toward his wine glass, and some part of me knew what was coming. But I was frozen in place, watching with a strange detachment as he lifted it. The trajectory of the wine seemed to happen in slow motion. I saw the dark red liquid arc through the air, suspended like rubies for a heartbeat before time snapped back to normal speed as the cold liquid hit my face and chest. The Cabernet soaked instantly into my ivory dress, spreading like a blood stain across the delicate fabric. The pain wasn't physical this time, but the humiliation burned just as hot. The restaurant fell silent, the entire dining room holding its breath in collective shock. Now look what you made me do, Nick said calmly, dabbing his mouth with his napkin as if he'd just finished a satisfying meal. If you'd just been reasonable about this. That's when I saw our reflection in one of the antique mirrors, me dripping with wine, makeup running down my face, dress ruined, and Nick sitting there perfectly composed, not a hair out of place. The image crystallized everything. The careful facade he maintained, the violence he was capable of, the years of subtle control that had led to this moment. A server appeared with napkins, her hands shaking slightly as she offered them to me. Ma'am, should I call someone? No need, Nick answered for me, his professional voice firmly in place. My wife isn't feeling well. She gets emotional sometimes, you understand. Just bring the check. But I wasn't listening to him anymore. I was watching my reflection in that mirror, watching as wine dripped down my face, and seeing something else entirely. The prison I'd built around myself, bar by careful bar, each one made of compromises and concessions and careful silences. Actually, I said, standing up slowly, do call someone. Call the manager. The look of shock on Nick's face would have been satisfying if I hadn't been so focused on the burning sensation of humiliation spreading through me. But beneath that humiliation, something else was growing. Something that felt like clarity, like strength, like Gran's voice whispering, "Now you see it, butterfly. Now you can fly." As I walked out of Belvino that night, I heard him calling, After me, his voice switching between concern and anger, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop, because for the first time in years, I was moving forward instead of standing still. And even through the humiliation, it felt like freedom. The October night air hit my wine-soaked dress like a shock of reality. Rain was falling, in that typical Boston mist, mixing with the wine on my face and creating an absurd blend of Cabernet and rainwater that would have been funny if it wasn't so horrifying. My ivory dress was ruined, stained a violent crimson that made me look like a victim in a crime scene. I made it half a block before the adrenaline started to wear off, and the reality of what had just happened really hit me. My husband, the man I'd shared my bed with for 5 years, the man I'd built a life with, had thrown a glass of wine in. My face in a public restaurant. Over money. Over control. And somehow, despite the humiliation and the ruined dress and the stares from passers-by, all I felt was a strange, floating sense of clarity. As if I'd been underwater for years and had finally broken through to the surface, gasping in air that was cold and sharp, but so real. A group of women on a girls' night out stopped in their tracks when they saw me standing there, wine dripping from my face, mascara running in black rivulets down my cheeks. "Oh my God, are you okay?" one of them asked, stepping forward with concern. She was wearing a medical ID badge from Boston General Hospital. Sonia Parker, RN, my husband. I started, then stopped, the words sticking in my throat. How do you tell strangers that the respected financial advisor they probably read about in Boston Business Monthly had just thrown red wine in your face over an inheritance dispute? Sonia seemed to understand anyway. "You need to get somewhere. Safe," she said firmly. "This dress is ruined, and you shouldn't be alone right now. Let me call you an Uber." "No," I cut her off, suddenly panicked. "Not home. I can't go back there. Not tonight." The thought of facing Nick again, of hearing his explanations and justifications, made me physically ill. "There's a hotel 3 blocks from here," another of the women offered. "My sister works at the front desk. They'll give you a room, no questions asked." Sonia and her friends insisted on accompanying me as we walked. I learned they were all nurses, celebrating a colleague's engagement. The irony of being rescued by healthcare professionals while fleeing from my investment advisor husband wasn't lost on me. The hotel was discreet, upscale, but not flashy. True to her word, the woman's sister arranged a room for me without requiring a credit card. "We'll sort it out tomorrow," she assured me, eyeing my stained dress with sympathy. Once alone in the anonymous hotel room, I stood under the shower, for what felt like hours, watching red wine spiral down the drain. My phone had been buzzing constantly, Nick switching between apologetic texts and thinly veiled threats. "You're overreacting. Come home so we can discuss this rationally. Think about what walking out like this will do to my reputation. If you'd just been reasonable, none of this would have happened. Don't make me take legal action, Sophia." I turned off my phone and wrapped myself in the hotel's plush robe, sitting on the edge of the bed to assess my situation. My grandmother's letter lay soggy in my purse. I'd grabbed it on my way out the door this morning, carrying it like a talisman. Now I carefully spread the damp pages on the desk to dry. Gran's words blurring but still legible. "The right partner lifts you higher. The wrong one clips your wings." Nick had done more than clip my wings tonight. He'd shown me exactly who he was. Not just controlling, not just manipulative, but capable of public violence when his control was threatened. The realization wasn't exactly a shock. It was more like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place, completing a picture I'd been working on for years without recognizing what I was creating. The beautiful, ambitious boy I'd fallen in love with had always contained the seeds of this man, the one who saw my success as a threat, my independence as disloyalty, my body and mind as extensions of his possessions. I thought about calling my parents, but they were somewhere in northern Ethiopia with limited connectivity. Besides, what would I say? Your daughter, the one you trusted Vivian to raise right, ended up in an abusive marriage anyway? Because that's what this was, wasn't it? Abuse. The word felt strange applied to my life. To me, Sophia Marshall Reynolds, successful business owner, respected community member. Abuse happened to other women, women without resources or education or supportive families, not to women like me. But then I remembered Gran's book club selections over the years, the memoirs and novels and research texts she'd casually left on the coffee table during my visits. Stories of accomplished, intelligent women who found themselves gradually controlled, isolated, diminished by the men they loved. Women who didn't see the pattern until something broke them out of it. Often something violent, something public, something impossible to rationalize away. Like a glass of wine thrown in your face on your anniversary. A knock at the hotel room. Door startled me out of my thoughts. For a terrifying moment, I thought Nick had somehow found me. But when I checked the peephole, I saw Celia, my assistant, standing there with a small suitcase. "How did you find me?" I asked as I opened the door. "Sonia Parker called the office. Her sister was in nursing school with my cousin," Celia explained, stepping inside and setting down the bag. "Small world. I brought you some clothes, toiletries, your laptop." I looked at her in confusion. "How did you get these things?" "I have your spare keys, remember? For when you need me to water the plants when you travel." Her expression was cautious, measuring my reaction. I waited until I saw Nick leave in the Tesla. He looked furious, was practically burning rubber out of the garage. The thought of her in my penthouse, possibly risking an encounter with Nick, made me feel sick. "Celia, that was dangerous. If he'd caught you, then he'd have had to explain to the doorman why he was attacking your assistant," she said with surprising firmness. "Besides, I wasn't alone. Jonas from building security went up with me." That's when I noticed the bruise forming on Celia's wrist, partially covered by her sleeve. I reached out and gently pushed the fabric back, revealing finger marks that could only have been made by someone grabbing her roughly. "Did Nick do this to you?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears, distant and cold. Celia pulled her arm back. "Not tonight. Last month, when he came to the office and you were meeting with that bride at the Four Seasons, he didn't like that. I wouldn't tell him exactly where you were, said I worked for him by extension." She shrugged, trying to look nonchalant. "I didn't tell you because you seemed so stressed already, and he apologized the next day. Sent flowers." The revelation hit me like another glass of wine to the face. Nick had hurt my employee, my friend, and I hadn't even known. What else had I missed? What other damage had he done while I was busy maintaining our perfect facade? "I'm sorry," I said, tears welling up. "I'm so sorry he hurt you, that I didn't see it." Celia's expression softened. "It's not your fault, Sophia. I've watched him isolate you for years, chip away at your confidence. The rest of the team sees it too. We've been worried, but we didn't know how to help." "The rest of the team?" I echoed, realizing how much I'd underestimated not just Nick's behavior, but its visibility to others. "Why do you think Ashley keeps inviting you to girls' nights, even though you've canceled the last 8 times? Why does Joey still send you ridiculous gifts every morning even though Nick made it clear he wasn't welcome at your house anymore?" She sat beside me on the bed. "We've been trying to keep the door open, waiting for you to walk through it." I thought about all the invitations I'd declined, the friendships I'd let fade, the connections I'd allowed to wither under Nick's subtle pressure. I'd thought I was making small sacrifices for marital harmony. Instead, I'd been cutting away, my own safety net, strand by strand. "What do I do now?" I asked, feeling suddenly very young and very lost. Celia smiled, a determined gleam in her eye. "First, you get some sleep. Tomorrow we call Andrew Barrett. And then," she squeezed my hand, "we start rebuilding what Nick tried to tear down." That night, In the anonymous safety of the hotel room, I dreamed of flying, soaring above Boston's skyline, free and unafraid. Gran was there, her silver hair catching the sunlight, her blue eyes bright with pride. "Fly, butterfly," she said, in my dream. You were always meant for more than a gilded cage. I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains, momentarily disoriented. The events of the previous night came rushing back as I noticed my ruined ivory dress draped over a chair, wine stains now dried to a dull burgundy, like old blood. Celia had arranged to meet Andrew Barrett at his office at 10 a.m. I showered and dressed in the clothes she'd brought, a simple black dress I kept at the office for client emergencies, practical and understated. As I applied concealer to hide the shadows under my eyes, I studied my reflection. I looked different somehow. My eyes were clearer, more focused, as if the wine had washed away a film I hadn't known was there. "You look better," Celia said when I emerged from the bathroom. She'd returned early with coffee and pastries. "More like the Sophia I remember from when you started Radiant Events." I don't know how I feel," I admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Scared, angry, but also strangely calm, like I've been holding my breath for years and can finally exhale. My phone, which I'd turned back on to check messages from clients, buzzed with another text from Nick. "This has gone far enough, Sophia. Come home now and we'll forget this happened. Otherwise, there will be consequences." I showed it to Celia, who scowled. Classic abuser tactic. Threat followed by vague consequences. He's panicking because you're out of his control. The word abuser still felt strange applied to Nick. Handsome, successful Nick who charmed everyone he met, who was admired in Boston's financial circles, who served on charity boards and mentored business school students. But the evidence was undeniable. The wine in my face, the bruises on Celia's wrist, the years of isolation and control I'd endured while telling myself it was normal. Andrew Barrett's office was a haven of old-world stability. Dark wood, leather-bound law books, Boston Harbor visible through tall windows. He greeted me warmly, his eyes taking in my composed exterior with the shrewd assessment of a man who'd spent decades reading people. "Vivian prepared for this day," he said after I'd explained the situation, including the incident at Belvino. She didn't know the specific catalyst, of course, but she recognized the pattern. She saw in Nick what you were not yet ready to see. He pulled out a thick folder from his desk. "Your grandmother put together what she called a freedom package. In addition to the trust, which is already ironclad against any claims Nick might make, she arranged for immediate access to funds separate from your joint accounts, documentation about recognizing financial abuse, and contacts for both legal and emotional support." The thoroughness of Gran's preparations brought fresh tears to my eyes. Even from beyond the grave, she was protecting me, providing exactly what I needed before I knew I needed it. "There's more," Andrew continued. "Vivian suspected Nick might attempt to undermine your business if you ever tried to leave. She created a separate LLC as a holding company for Radiant Events, with you as the sole owner and the trust as backup capital. We can transfer operations immediately to protect your clients and team." I stared at the documents in front of me, overwhelmed by Gran's foresight. "She knew," I whispered. "All this time, she knew this would happen." "She hoped it wouldn't," Andrew corrected gently. "But she wanted you to have options if it did. Vivian believed that true freedom comes from having choices." We spent the next hour outlining a strategy, securing my business assets, freezing joint accounts before Nick could empty them, changing locks on the brownstone, filing for a temporary restraining order based on the public incident at Belvino and Celia's documented injury. "What about divorce?" I asked finally, the word feeling both terrifying and liberating. "One step at a time," Andrew advised. "Secure your safety and your assets first. The divorce will follow, but it's likely to be contentious. Nick won't let go easily." As if on cue, my phone rang. Nick's office number. I declined the call, only to have it immediately ring again. On the third attempt, Andrew gestured for me to answer and put it on speaker. Sophia, where the hell are... You? Nick's voice was tightly controlled, but I could hear the rage simmering beneath. I've been calling all night. The clients from Singapore are here for dinner tonight, and I need you home preparing. I'm not coming home, Nick, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. Not after what happened last night. Last night? He laughed, but it sounded hollow. You're throwing away 5 years of marriage over a little spilled wine? You're being ridiculous. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Now come home. It wasn't spilled, Nick. You threw it in my face, in public, because I wouldn't give you control of my inheritance. You're twisting things as usual, he said, his voice hardening. If you had just been reasonable. Mr. Reynolds, Andrew interrupted. This is Andrew Barrett, Mrs. Marshall's attorney. I suggest you refrain from further contact with my client except through legal channels. Any attempts to pressure or intimidate her will be documented and could affect proceedings going forward. There was a moment of stunned silence before Nick's voice returned, ice cold. You've involved lawyers already? You really want to play it this way, Sophia? This isn't a game, I said, finally understanding something fundamental about my husband. To him, everything was strategy. Everyone was either an asset or an obstacle. There was no love, only possession, no partnership, only control. It never was to me. Goodbye, Nick. After ending the call, I sat in silence, processing what had just happened. I'd taken the first definitive step away from my marriage, away from the life I'd built with Nick. It should have felt devastating. Instead, it felt like setting down a heavy weight I'd been carrying for years. What now? I asked, looking between Andrew and Celia. Now you reclaim your life, Andrew said simply, starting with where you'll live. The answer was obvious. Gran's brownstone. My brownstone now. The place where I'd grown up, where I'd learned about strength and independence from a woman who embodied both. The home that waited for me, not as a retreat, but as a launching pad for whatever came next. As we left Andrew's office, Boston sparkled in the autumn sunlight. The same city, the same streets I'd walked 1,000 times, but everything looked different now. Colors seemed brighter, sounds clearer, as if my senses had been dulled during my years with Nick and were now awakening again. On the sidewalk, Celia touched my arm. What about the Singapore client's dinner? I thought about the elaborate meal I would have prepared, the perfectly selected wines, the conversation I would have carefully managed to showcase Nick's brilliance, the hours of work I would have invested to create another flawless performance of the perfect corporate wife. Nick's a big boy, I said, feeling a smile spread across my face. He can order takeout. Celia laughed, linking her arm through mine as we walked toward the car. That's the Sophia I remember. Later that afternoon, I stood in Gran's library, my library now, running my fingers along the spines of books that had shaped my childhood. The room smelled of leather and paper, and Gran's subtle perfume, as if she might walk in at any moment with a new business biography for me to read, or a financial report to discuss. On her desk, my desk now, I placed her damp, wine-stained letter, carefully smoothing the pages. Beside it, I set my phone, still buzzing periodically with messages from Nick, ranging from pleading to threatening, from colleagues wondering about my absence, from the life I was now stepping away from. I thought about how many times I'd nearly seen the truth about my marriage but had looked away, how many warning signs I'd reinterpreted as love or protection or normal marital compromise, the subtle isolation from friends, the gradual undermining of my business, the constant critiques, disguised as helpful suggestions, the growing control over my time, my appearance, my dreams. You were right, Gran, I said aloud to the empty room. About everything. I could almost hear her response. It's never too late to change direction, butterfly. The question is, where will you fly now? For the first time in years, I was free to answer that question for myself. The prospect was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating, like standing on the edge of a cliff, afraid of falling, but knowing that with the right wings, I might just soar. The first night in the brownstone was surreal. I walked through rooms filled with Gran's belongings, her antique furniture, her art collection, her shelves of books, now all mine. The house was exactly as she'd left it, preserved by the weekly housekeeper who'd continued her duties even after Gran's passing. It felt both comforting and strange, like stepping back in time while simultaneously stepping into a new future. I settled into the guest room rather than Gran's master suite, not quite ready to claim that space as my own. My phone continued to buzz with Nick's escalating messages until I finally turned it off completely. Tomorrow would be soon enough to deal with the fallout. Sleep eluded me. I lay awake, watching moonlight create patterns on the ceiling, my mind racing with doubts and questions. Had I overreacted? Was I throwing away a 5-year marriage over one incident? What would people think? How would this affect my business? My reputation? My future? Then I remembered Celia's bruised wrist, the countless small humiliations I'd endured, the constant walking on eggshells, and the wine streaming down my face in a restaurant full of witnesses. Not overreacting. If anything, I had underreacted for years. Morning brought a barrage of practical concerns. I needed clothes, toiletries, my laptop, important documents, all still at the penthouse we'd shared. I needed to contact clients whose events were scheduled for the coming weeks. I needed to secure my business records and finances before Nick could interfere with them. I also needed to face the world with my new status, a woman leaving her husband after a public incident. In Boston's close-knit social circles, news traveled fast, and Nick undoubtedly was already crafting his narrative. Celia arrived early with coffee and bagels, her efficiency a lifeline in my suddenly chaotic existence. "The team's handling today's consultations," she assured me. "Joey's covering the Anderson wedding setup, and Ashley's managing the pharmaceutical launch. Everything's under control." "How much do they know?" I asked, suddenly concerned about dragging my employees into my personal drama. "Just that you and Nick are separating, and there might be some complications," Celia said carefully, "though the bruises on my wrist tell a story of their own." My stomach twisted with guilt. "I'm so sorry he hurt you, that I didn't protect you from that." "Stop," Celia said firmly. "You're not responsible for his actions. And anyway, we're all Team Sophia, always have been." The first strategic move was securing my business. Andrew Barrett had arranged for an IT specialist to transfer our systems to new servers and change all access credentials. By noon, Nick had been locked out of every aspect of Radiant events: email, client files, financial records, social media. His reaction was swift. At 12:17 p.m., my office received a legal letter claiming that as my spouse, he had rights to the company assets and demanding immediate restoration of access. Andrew responded with documentation of the separate LLC Gran had created, effectively rendering Nick's claims moot. At 1:30 p.m., 3 police officers and a locksmith arrived at the brownstone. Andrew had arranged for them to accompany me to the penthouse to retrieve my essential belongings. The precautions seemed excessive until we arrived to find Nick waiting, his Tesla parked conspicuously in the visitor spot. "This is ridiculous, Sophia," he said, all charm for the officer's benefit. "We had one fight, couples fight. There's no need for this spectacle." His eyes flicked to the locksmith, then back to me, his expression hardening slightly. "Whatever point you're trying to make, I get it. Let's talk inside. Alone. Sir, Mrs. Reynolds has requested police presence while she collects her belongings," the senior officer stated firmly. "You can either allow this to proceed calmly, or you can leave the premises until it's completed." It's actually Ms. Marshall, I corrected quietly. I'm reverting to my legal name. Nick's mask slipped then, just for a moment, his eyes flashing with rage before he composed himself. Fine, take what's yours, but we both know what this is really about. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear. You think your grandmother's money makes you untouchable? This is just beginning, Sophia. The threat hung in the air as I walked past him into what had been our home. With the officers watching, I methodically gathered my clothes, jewelry, personal documents, and a few sentimental items. I left behind the designer dresses Nick had selected, the jewelry he'd given me for milestone achievements, as if I were an employee receiving bonuses, the photos of us that had always seemed more like corporate headshots than loving mementos. In our home office, I found evidence of Nick's next moves, printouts of my client list, notes about approaching my key clients to suggest my instability might affect their events, a draft email to my landlord questioning the renewal of my studio lease. He'd been planning a systematic dismantling of my business and independence. I photographed everything with the officers as witnesses, then continued my efficient packing. The entire process took less than an hour, but it felt like closing a chapter that had consumed 5 years of my life. As I left, I handed Nick my keys to the penthouse, a symbolic gesture that wasn't legally necessary but felt important nonetheless. You'll regret this, he said quietly as I walked toward the elevator, the officers flanking me with my belongings. When the trust money's tied up in legal battles for years, when your precious business loses clients because of the scandal, when everyone knows you walked out on your marriage over nothing, you'll wish you'd been reasonable. I turned back to look at him, this man I'd once loved, once believed in, once trusted with my heart and future. In that moment, I saw him clearly. Not the charming investment advisor everyone admired, but a frightened, controlling man who could only feel powerful by diminishing others. The wine wasn't nothing, Nick, I said calmly. It was just the final drop. Back at the brownstone, I stood in grand study, my study now, surrounded by boxes of my hastily packed life, trying to process the whirlwind of the past 24 hours. I'd left my husband. I was effectively homeless, or rather between homes. My business was under threat. My reputation was likely being shredded in Nick's narrative even now. Yet beneath the anxiety and uncertainty, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The constant tension of anticipating Nick's moods, of monitoring my words and actions to avoid triggering his disapproval, of contorting myself into the shape of his expectations. It was gone. In its place was a strange, unfamiliar lightness. The doorbell rang, startling me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Joey, my oldest friend whom Nick had effectively banished from our lives, standing on the steps with a bottle of champagne and a determined expression. Celia told me everything, he said, wrapping me in a fierce hug. I'm so sorry, Soph, and also really fucking proud of you for walking out. Joey had been my friend since college, the creative director at an advertising agency who'd helped design my first business logo for free when I was just starting out. Nick had deemed him too flamboyant and unprofessional after Joey had challenged one of Nick's political comments at a dinner party 3 years ago. Our friendship had dwindled to occasional texts and rushed coffee meetings I didn't tell Nick about. I've missed you, I said, realizing how true it was only as the words left my mouth. Well, I'm back now, and I've called in reinforcements. He gestured to the street where Ashley was emerging from her car, carrying what looked like takeout bags. Emergency support team reporting for duty, she announced, climbing the steps. I brought Thai food, face masks for a spa night, and 5 years of pent-up conversations we couldn't have because your husband was a controlling asshat. For the first time since the wine hit my face, I laughed, a genuine, unexpected burst of joy. These were my people, coming back to me like they'd been waiting in the wings all along. Or perhaps more accurately, I was coming back to them, emerging from the isolation that had become so normal I'd stopped noticing it. As we spread cartons of pad thai and green curry across Grand's antique dining table, Joey raised his champagne glass. To Sophia 2.0, free, fabulous, and finally rid of that investment vampire who was sucking the life out of her. To new beginnings, Ashley added, and to Vivian, who saw what none of us could say out loud. I raised my glass, looking around at these friends who had refused to give up on me even when I'd almost given up on myself. To Gran, I agreed, who gave me more than money. She gave me a way out. That night, surrounded by friends in my grandmother's house, with my future uncertain but undeniably my own, I felt the first real stirrings of hope. The road ahead would be difficult. Nick would fight, clients might leave, gossip would spread. But for the first time in years, I was moving forward on my own terms. And that made all the difference. The first wave of Nick's retaliation hit on Monday morning, 3 days after the wine incident. I was meeting with Andrew Barrett about filing for divorce when my phone exploded with notifications, clients calling in panic, team members texting in confusion, social media alerts pinging relentlessly. "What's happening?" I asked Celia, who burst into Andrew's office without knocking, her face pale. "Nick sent an email to every client on our roster," she said, handing me her tablet. "Somehow he got access to our backup contact list." The message was masterfully crafted, concerned rather than angry, professional rather than personal. "Dear valued client of Radiant Events, as a courtesy, I feel obligated to inform you of some concerning developments that may affect your upcoming event. My wife, Sophia Marshall Reynolds, is currently experiencing significant personal difficulties that have impacted her judgment and reliability. She has abruptly left our home, is refusing communication with family members concerned about her well-being, and may be unable to fulfill her professional commitments in her current state. As someone who has supported her business from its inception, I wanted to provide this information so you can make informed decisions about your important occasions. If you have concerns or would like recommendations for alternative event planning services, please don't hesitate to contact me directly. Sincerely, Nicholas Reynolds, CFA Managing Director, Meridian Investments. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. With a few carefully chosen words, Nick had undermined my professional reputation, painted me as unstable, and positioned himself as the concerned, supportive husband, all while offering to redirect my clients to planners who would undoubtedly be loyal to him. "He's trying to destroy the business," I said, the reality hitting me like a physical blow. "If clients believe this and start canceling—" "They won't," Celia interrupted firmly. "The team is already making calls, explaining that you and Nick are separating and he's acting out of spite. Joey's drafted a response we can send to everyone on the list." Andrew studied the email with narrowed eyes. "This borders on defamation. We can certainly include it in the divorce filing as evidence of malicious intent to damage your livelihood." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with another notification, this time from my bank. All the business accounts had been frozen, due to a reported fraud alert. Nick couldn't access the money directly, but he could certainly create obstacles. "He's trying to force me back," I realized, the pattern suddenly clear. "Cut off my income, damage my reputation, make it impossible for me to stand on my own." "Classic abuser tactics," Andrew agreed, already dialing the bank. "But his strategy has a fundamental flaw. He still thinks you're alone." That became the theme of the week as Nick's attacks escalated across multiple fronts. When the bank accounts were unfrozen, thanks to Andrew's legal team, Nick approached my landlord with fabricated concerns about business stability, almost costing me the studio lease. When that failed, he contacted vendors, suggesting payment problems and encouraging them to demand upfront fees. Each morning brought a new crisis, a new fire to extinguish. But something unexpected was happening alongside the chaos. People, were rallying around me. Vendors I'd built relationships with over years saw through Nick's manipulations. Clients who knew me and my work responded to his email with messages of support. My team worked overtime, maintaining the quality of our events while helping me navigate the personal tsunami. The most surprising ally emerged on Wednesday when Pierre Fontaine, owner of Belvino and witness to the wine incident, called me personally. "Man, your husband. He has been contacting my regular customers," Pierre said, his French accent more pronounced in his anger. "He tells them my restaurant has, how you say, a pest problem, that people became sick after dining here. This is because I gave statement to police about what I saw him do to you." "Pierre, I'm so sorry," I began, horrified that Nick would target an innocent business. Non. I do not call for apology. I call because now I am angry. I have security. Video of that night. Very clear. Your lawyer should have it, yes? For the divorce?" The security footage arrived at Andrew's office the next morning. Crystal clear evidence of Nick deliberately throwing his wine at me. The calculated way he'd done it, his calm demeanor afterward. No one watching could possibly interpret it as an accident or a mutual fight. "This is extremely helpful," Andrew said, reviewing the footage. "Combined with the email to your clients and the documented attacks on your business, we're building a strong case of ongoing harassment and financial abuse." But Nick wasn't finished. By Friday, he'd escalated to approaching potential new clients before they could sign with Radiant Events, offering his insights about the company's instability. He'd even convinced 2 couples to cancel contracts, costing me thousands in deposits I had to refund. The most painful blow came when I learned he'd contacted my parents in Ethiopia, painting a distorted picture of mental instability and implying I needed intervention. Their worried emails arrived filled with misinformation only Nick could have provided, their limited internet access making it difficult to explain the full situation. "He's trying to isolate you again," Ashley observed as we sat in Grand's kitchen Friday night, strategizing over takeout. "Cut you off from support. Make you look unstable to everyone who matters to you. The difference is, now you can see what he's doing," Joey added, updating the spreadsheet we'd created to document every instance of Nick's interference. "And you're not facing it alone." He was right. Despite the professional and personal chaos Nick was creating, I felt more supported than I had in years. Friends I'd been distant from reached out offering help. Industry colleagues I respected sent referrals to show their confidence. Even strangers, women who'd heard about the incident through Boston's grapevine, sent messages of solidarity. The most unexpected support came from 3 of Nick's colleagues' wives, who invited me to coffee with the explicit purpose of sharing their own stories. "We've watched how he treated you at company events," said Vanessa, wife of Nick's fellow managing director. "The constant corrections, the way he'd interrupt you, how he'd recite your accomplishments as if he'd made them happen. We recognized it because our husbands do the same things," added Erin, twisting her massive diamond ring nervously. "Maybe not to the same degree, but the pattern is identical. When you walked out, you became both a threat and an inspiration," explained Melissa, the youngest of the 3. "A threat because you might influence us, and an inspiration because you did what we sometimes dream about." Their insights into how Nick was likely plotting his next moves proved invaluable. As wives of his peers, they understood the financial world's power dynamics and the tactics men like Nick used to maintain control. They warned me about potential reputation damage in country club circles, about how he might try to turn mutual friends against me, about the importance of maintaining absolute professionalism to counter his unstable narrative. By the weekend, a pattern had emerged in Nick's attacks. Whenever one approach failed, he quickly pivoted to another. When direct business interference didn't break me, he switched to social sabotage. When that didn't work, he attempted family manipulation. He was systematically targeting every support system and resource I had, testing for weaknesses. "He's going to keep escalating," I realized during a Sunday strategy session with Andrew, Celia, and the core support team we'd begun calling the Liberation Committee. This isn't just about the trust money anymore. It's about the fact that I left. Men like Nick can't handle rejection, Andrew agreed. In his mind, you're a possession that's malfunctioning, not a person who's made a legitimate choice. So what do? I asked, exhausted from a week of constant defense. We switch from reactive to proactive, Joey said, a determined gleam in his eye. Nick's counting on you being too busy putting out fires to build anything new. So let's do exactly what he doesn't expect. Which is, I prompted, use your grandmother's trust exactly as she intended, to expand your business, support women entrepreneurs, and build something so successful that Nick's attacks look exactly like what they are, the desperate actions of a man who couldn't control you anymore. The idea resonated with something deep inside me, not just survival but transformation. Not just escaping Nick's control, but building something he could never touch or claim credit for. I thought about Gran's letter, about her vision for the trust, about the foundation she'd wanted me to create. For the first time since the wine hit my face, I felt my focus shift from what I was leaving behind to what I could create ahead. You're right, I said, feeling a new clarity emerge from the chaos of the week. The best revenge isn't just living well. It's thriving in exactly the ways he tried to prevent. As the Liberation Committee began outlining an offensive strategy, I felt a strange sense of gratitude amid the turmoil. Nick's attacks were painful and disruptive, but they had also revealed something essential. I was stronger than he thought, and I was far from alone. The cage door had been opened, and, despite his best efforts, I was already flying free. 2 weeks after the wine incident, I stood in what had once been Gran's formal dining room, now transformed into the headquarters of what we were calling Project Butterfly. The massive mahogany table was covered with laptops, architectural plans, financial projections, and the remains of Thai takeout that had fueled our Sunday planning session. It's ambitious, Andrew Barrett said, reviewing the documents we'd prepared. Launching a foundation, expanding Radiant events to New York, and initiating a mentorship program for women entrepreneurs, all simultaneously. Ambitious is exactly what we need, I replied, energized in a way I hadn't felt in years. Nick expects me to be in defensive mode, just trying to save what I have. He won't be prepared for expansion. The plan had come together organically over the past week. Rather than just preserving my existing business against Nick's attacks, we would use Gran's trust exactly as she'd intended, creating the Vivian Marshall Foundation for Women's Financial Independence, with 3 key initiatives: a mentorship program for women entrepreneurs, a financial literacy curriculum for girls, and grants for women leaving abusive relationships. Alongside the foundation, Radiant Events would expand to New York, opening the office I'd dreamed of before Nick convinced me to focus locally. The Brownstones garden level would be converted into a co-working space for women-owned startups, creating an ecosystem of mutual support and innovation. It was exactly the vision Gran had outlined in her letter, using her legacy not just to help me escape Nick's control, but to extend that opportunity to other women. The timing works perfectly, Celia pointed out, highlighting our project timeline. The divorce filing tomorrow will catch Nick's attention while we're already setting these plans in motion. The divorce papers represented a significant escalation. 1, Nick wouldn't be able to ignore or spin as temporary instability. They included the Belvino security footage, documentation of his systematic attacks on my business, Celia's statement about her wrist injury, and statements from witnesses who'd seen his controlling behavior over years. He'll fight it, Andrew warned. Men like Nick don't surrender control easily. Expect more aggressive tactics once he's served. Let him fight, I said with newfound determination. Every attack just proves why this foundation is necessary. The next morning, I took my first truly offensive action since walking out of Belvino. While Nick was being served with divorce papers at his office, I was meeting with the architectural firm that would renovate the Brownstones garden level into the co-working space. While he was calling his lawyer in rage, I was interviewing candidates to run the New York office of Radiant Events. While he was crafting his next attack, I was approving the logo for the Vivian Marshall Foundation. By the time Nick's counteroffensive arrived, a scathing legal response demanding psychological evaluation, claiming I was unstable and squandering family assets, the foundation's website had already launched, featuring Gran's story alongside a carefully worded explanation of my own journey from financial control to independence. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Women from across Boston and beyond reached out with their own stories, offers of support, and applications for both mentorship and workspace. 3 major publications requested interviews about the foundation's mission. A tech CEO offered to match Gran's initial funding, doubling our capacity for grants. "He fundamentally misunderstood who you are," Joey observed as we reviewed the flood of supportive messages. "He thought you'd crumble without him. Instead, you're building an empire." Nick's attacks continued and even intensified. Legal motions, attempts to freeze the trust assets, whisper campaigns in social circles we'd once shared. But something had shifted in the dynamic between us. I was no longer just responding to his moves. I was making my own, creating something he couldn't touch or diminish. On the 1-month anniversary of the wine incident, I returned to Belvino, for the first time, not as a victim, but as a businesswoman finalizing details for a foundation launch event Pierre had offered to host at no charge. "The perfect symmetry," Pierre approved, showing me the private dining room he'd reserved. "Where something ugly happened, now something beautiful begins." As I walked through the restaurant, I caught a glimpse of myself in the same antique mirror that had reflected my wine-stained humiliation a month earlier. The woman looking back at me now stood taller, her eyes clear and focused, her purpose evident in every movement. In just 1 month, I had reclaimed not just my independence, but my vision for the future. The trust that Nick had coveted was now powering exactly the kind of women's empowerment he had tried to prevent in his own home. Gran would have called it poetic justice. I called it reclamation of my power, my purpose, and my life. 3 months after the night Nick threw wine in my face, I stood at the podium in the ballroom of the Fairmont Copley Plaza, addressing the sold-out inaugural gala of the Vivian Marshall Foundation. The room glittered with candlelight, Boston's business and philanthropic communities mingling with the foundation's first cohort of mentees, 20 women entrepreneurs who would receive guidance, workspace, and seed funding. "Transformation," I began, my voice steady and clear, "rarely happens in comfortable circumstances. Often, it's forced upon us through moments of crisis that reveal truths we've been avoiding. 3 months ago, I experienced such a moment." Paused, looking out at the audience. In the front row sat my newly formed board of directors, Joey, Ashley, Celia, Andrew Barrett, and 3 prominent businesswomen who'd joined our cause. Behind them, the first mentorship cohort, their faces alight with possibility, and scattered throughout the room, women who'd reached out after hearing my story, each with their own version of a controlling relationship they'd escaped or were planning to leave. My grandmother Vivian taught me that financial independence is the foundation of personal freedom. She built her career when women were expected to be accessories to men's success, not architects of their own. She left me more than money. She left me the blueprint for liberation, not just for myself, but for others. In the 3 months since leaving Nick, I had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined that night at Belvino. The woman who had walked, out dripping with wine, humiliated, confused but determined, had evolved into someone stronger, clearer, and more purposeful than I'd been in years. The divorce proceedings continued, with Nick fighting every step, but his tactics had lost their power to devastate me. Each attack, freezing assets, challenging the trust, attempting to devalue Radiant Events for the settlement, was met with calm, strategic resistance from Andrew's team. More importantly, while Nick remained fixated on punishing me for leaving, I had moved forward. Radiant Events had not only survived his attempts to destroy it but had expanded, with the New York office already booking high-profile clients. The co-working space in the Brownstones garden level was at full capacity with a waiting list. The Foundation's mentorship program had received over 200 applications for 20 spots. We cannot always choose our moments of transformation, I continued at the podium. But we can choose what we build from them. Tonight, we're not just launching a foundation. We're creating a community of women who understand that true power comes not from controlling others, but from lifting each other toward our highest potential. As I spoke, I caught sight of my reflection in one of the ballroom's ornate mirrors, a woman in a bold red dress, a color Nick had always discouraged as too attention-seeking. Standing tall, speaking with authority about her vision. The contrast with the wine-soaked, shocked woman from 3 months ago couldn't have been more stark. The transformation wasn't just external. Inside, I had changed in fundamental ways. The habit of making myself smaller to accommodate Nick's ego had been replaced by a willingness to take up space, to assert my vision. The constant anxiety about his approval had given way to a steady confidence in my own judgment. The isolation he had cultivated had been shattered by the community now surrounding me. My grandmother had a saying, I concluded, smiling at the memory of Gran in her library. When someone tries to clip your wings, don't just escape the cage. Build a sanctuary where others can learn to fly. Tonight, that sanctuary begins to take shape. Thank you for being part of it. As the room erupted in applause, I felt something I hadn't experienced since long before the wine incident, pure, uncomplicated joy. Nick had thrown that wine thinking it would force me back into line. Instead, it had set me free, revealing not just his true character, but my own strength. Some transformations begin with fire, others with ice. Mine had started with wine, and blossomed into something beyond even Gran's visionary planning. 1 year to the day after Nick threw wine in my face, I stood in Gran's library, my library now, holding the dress I'd worn that night. The ivory fabric was still stained deep burgundy, the wine's imprint a permanent reminder of the moment everything changed. I'd kept it deliberately, not as a symbol of victimhood, but as a testament to transformation. The brownstone had transformed, too. What was once Gran's private sanctuary was now a vibrant hub of activity. The garden-level co-working space buzzed with women entrepreneurs building their dreams. The formal living room had become a classroom for financial literacy workshops. Gran's library remained my private retreat, but even it had evolved, her financial textbooks now sharing space with books on women's leadership, trauma recovery, and entrepreneurial strategy. Radiant Events had not just survived Nick's attempts to destroy it, it had thrived. With offices in Boston and New York, and a third location planned for Chicago, we'd become known for creating experiences that celebrated clients' authentic stories rather than just following trends. The wine incident, ironically, had freed me to pursue a more meaningful vision for my company than I'd ever dared under Nick's influence. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, after Nick finally realized his delaying tactics were only costing him money and reputation. The settlement was fair but firm. I kept Gran's inheritance, my business, and the brownstone. He kept our penthouse, his investment accounts, and the bitter knowledge that he'd lost control not just of me, but of the narrative he'd tried to craft. I'd heard through mutual connections that he'd left Boston for London, unable to maintain his carefully constructed image in a city where too many people now knew the truth. His professional trajectory had stalled, his mentorship initiative for business students had lost funding, and several investors had quietly withdrawn from his fund. Actions, as Gran always said, have consequences. Setting down the ruined dress, I moved to the window overlooking the garden. The roses Gran had tended were in full bloom, now cared for by a rotating group of foundation mentees who found peace in gardening. Among them today was Melissa, one of the very wives who had reached out after my incident, now separated from Nick's colleague and building her own interior design business with the foundation's support. My phone chimed with a text from Celia. "Car's here. Ready for your TEDx talk." The invitation to speak about financial independence as a cornerstone of women's empowerment had come months ago. Today, I would stand on a red circle and share what I'd learned from both Gran and my own journey. How economic control becomes personal control, how financial literacy creates options, how having walk-away resources can sometimes save more than your bank account. I picked up the small ceramic dish on my desk, a piece I'd commissioned from a Dei, local artist. It was made using kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold. The artist had taken a wine glass, shattered it deliberately, then reconstructed it as a small dish, each crack filled with gleaming gold. This was my talisman. Now, the symbol I kept close as a reminder. What breaks us can become our greatest strength when reconstructed with purpose. Walking through the brownstone toward the waiting car, I passed dozens of photos now lining the hallway. Women at foundation events, mentorship graduates launching businesses, girls from our financial literacy program proudly displaying their first investment portfolios. Among them was a black and white portrait of Gran in her early career days, standing boldly in front of the investment firm that had initially hired her as a secretary. The foundation Gran had envisioned had become something even more powerful than either of us could have imagined. Not just a charitable organization, but a movement of women supporting each other toward financial and personal independence. Nick had thrown that wine thinking it would force me back into submission. Instead, it had sparked a transformation that was now helping hundreds of other women recognize and escape control in their own lives. Outside, Boston sparkled in the autumn sunlight. As I settled into the car, I caught sight of myself in the beat rearview mirror, confident, purposeful, free. The woman Nick had tried to diminish had not only reclaimed her power, but had built something he could never have imagined or controlled. Some would call it revenge. Gran would have called it justice. I called it my new foundation, built not on fear or control, but on the unshakable truth that had emerged the night wine dripped down my face. True strength isn't about power over others, but the courage to live authentically on your own terms. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.